On November 30th, 1849, a Harvard janitor spent 2 straight nights secretly chiseling through a brick wall in the basement of the medical school, convinced his boss had murdered a man and hidden the body somewhere in the building. He was right. What he found behind that wall would lead to America's first murder conviction secured with dental evidence, and it would take down one of the most respected scientists in the country. This is the Parkman-Webster case, and it happened in the last place anyone expected a murder to be solved, a chemistry laboratory. Boston in 1849 ran on old money and older reputations, and George Parkman had both in abundance. He came from one of the wealthiest families in the city, trained as a physician in his youth, and eventually turned away from medicine toward real estate and private lending, building a fortune large enough that he'd personally donated the land that let Harvard relocate its entire medical school into the heart of Boston. His name was already stitched into the very institution where his own murder would eventually be solved. Parkman was also famously, almost comically thrifty. He refused to buy a horse, and instead walked the city every single day, on foot, personally collecting debts from the men who owed him money. Everyone in Boston knew Dr. Parkman's face, because sooner or later, most of them owed him something. One of those men was John White Webster, a Harvard professor of chemistry and geology, and on paper, exactly the kind of respectable, educated gentleman nobody would suspect of anything. He lectured to Harvard's medical students, published scientific papers, and moved comfortably in the same elite Boston social circles as Parkman himself. But Webster's finances were a mess. His professor's salary couldn't cover the lifestyle his family was used to, and by the late 1840s, he'd already borrowed heavily from Parkman, money he had almost no realistic way to repay. To secure one of those loans, Webster had pledged his personal mineral collection as collateral. Then, sometime later, in a move that would eventually become central to the entire case, he quietly sold that same mineral collection to someone else entirely, without telling Parkman a thing. When Parkman found out, he was furious, and Parkman was not a man who let debts or deception slide. In the days before November 23, 1849, witnesses would later testify that Parkman had been openly agitated, telling multiple people he intended to confront Webster and settle the matter immediately, one way or another. On the afternoon of November 23rd, George Parkman set out on his usual walking route through Boston. He stopped at a shop and purchased lettuce for that evening's dinner, telling the shopkeeper he'd be back later to collect it. Then he walked into the Harvard Medical College building to meet with John Webster. He never picked up the lettuce. He never came home for dinner. He was never seen alive again. Parkman's disappearance became an instant citywide sensation, almost within hours. This wasn't some anonymous laborer who could go unnoticed for days. This was one of the most recognizable men in Boston, from one of its most powerful families, vanishing without a trace in broad daylight, on a street he'd walked nearly every day of his adult life. The mayor personally organized search parties. A $5,000 reward was posted, an enormous sum at the time. Boston Harbor was dragged. Webster himself, when questioned, calmly confirmed that yes, Parkman had come to see him that day about the debt, and that he'd paid him a partial sum in cash before Parkman left the building, apparently in good spirits. For days, that was the story everyone accepted. Ephraim Littlefield never bought it. Littlefield was the building's janitor, and his living quarters happened to share a wall directly with Webster's private laboratory. In the days after Parkman disappeared, Littlefield noticed Webster behaving in ways that made no sense for an innocent man. Webster, who never once in years had shown any interest in the building's furnace, suddenly kept his laboratory's furnace running at an unusually high temperature around the clock. He locked doors that were normally left open. He grew visibly agitated whenever anyone got close to his lab or his private privy vault, and at one point he even brought Littlefield an unexpected gift, as though trying to smooth something over. Littlefield decided to find out for himself. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, while the building was empty, he took a chisel to the brick wall separating his own quarters from the vault beneath Webster's privy, a project that took him 2 full nights of secret digging, chipping through solid masonry by candlelight, terrified of what he might find, and even more terrified of what would happen if he was wrong and his employer found out what he'd done to the wall. He worked mostly by feel in the dark, stopping every few minutes to listen for footsteps overhead. On the night of November 30th, he finally broke through. The smell hit him before anything else. Inside, he found a human pelvis, a right thigh, and a left leg, dismembered, and clearly not the remains of any anatomy specimen the medical school would have had on record. Littlefield ran for the police immediately. What followed was one of the most methodical crime scene investigations America had ever seen up to that point. Searchers found a thorax hidden inside a tea chest elsewhere in the building, and inside Webster's own furnace, sifted out from days of ash and clinker, Investigators recovered fragments of a jawbone and a set of teeth that had partially survived the heat. Those teeth are what actually solved the case. In 1846, 3 years before the murder, Parkman's own dentist, a man named Nathan Cooley Keep, had crafted him a custom set of false teeth and kept the original plaster molds used to build them. When investigators brought Keep the burned jaw fragments recovered from Webster's furnace, he compared them directly against his own 3-year-old casts in open court. They matched exactly, down to the precise, unique shape of the dental work he had personally created. Witnesses in the courtroom said, Keep wept while giving his testimony, overwhelmed by the moment of confirming, beyond any reasonable doubt, that these were the remains of a man he'd once treated as a patient. It was the first time in American legal history that dental evidence had ever been used to identify a body in a murder trial, a technique that's now standard forensic practice, born entirely out of this one case. John White Webster was arrested and put on trial in March of 1850, and the courtroom was packed for weeks straight, with spectators desperate to watch a Harvard professor stand accused of murdering one of Boston's wealthiest men. Newspapers as far away as London ran daily dispatches from the courtroom, and the presiding judge eventually had to issue tickets just to control the crowds trying to force their way inside to watch. The prosecution built its case around the debt, the lie about the mineral collection, Webster's erratic behavior in the days following the disappearance, and the dental evidence that placed Parkman's remains squarely inside Webster's own laboratory. Witness after witness took the stand over the following weeks, painting an increasingly damning picture of a man who had lied, stalled, and covered his tracks the entire time Boston searched for a friend he already knew was dead. The defense argued there was no witness, no confession, and no proof Webster had ever actually killed anyone, only that a body had been found in a building he worked in. It wasn't enough. On March 30th, 1850, the jury found Webster guilty of murder. Webster maintained his innocence for months after the verdict. Then, in June of 1850, facing execution, he finally confessed, though even then, he claimed the killing hadn't been planned. According to his account, Parkman had confronted him about the debt in a rage, humiliated him, and in a sudden fit of fury, Webster struck him with a piece of wood, killing him almost instantly. Whether or not that version was true, what came next was undeniably deliberate. Dismembering a man's body, distributing the pieces across a building, and burning the parts most likely to identify him takes a level of calculated cover-up that no jury was ever going to read as innocent panic. John White Webster was hanged on August 30th, 1850. The case he left behind did something almost no crime of its era managed to do. It permanently changed how murder investigations would work going forward. Before Parkman-Webster, courts had almost never accepted purely scientific evidence as proof of a body's identity. After it, forensic dentistry became a legitimate, permanent tool in criminal investigation, one still used in courtrooms today, nearly 2 centuries later. A wealthy man's stubborn habit of walking the city to collect his own debts got him killed by a professor who couldn't face the shame of being caught in a lie. And it took a janitor with a chisel and a dentist's 3-year-old plaster mold to prove exactly what happened behind a locked laboratory door.